Oh, no, I'm in no rush. You kidding me, man? It's an honor to talk to you.
Thank you. And I'm in my romantic backstage room here in Ohio. I'm on tour with Joe. So sorry for the background. I don't have one of those spiffy screens that pop up.
Well, I'm in our kitchen, and that's our little sign over my head there. So I'm talking to you on a
Ah,
Saturday afternoon. So we're good. We're good.
right
You
on.
by the way, and I always say mess up his name, Rick Beato, right? The
Rick
producer.
Beato, yeah.
Beato, one of the most compelling, informative interviews I've ever seen. And you guys were so comfortable with him. And thank you just for being part of that, because as a guy who's blown away by guitarists, that was really informative and enlightening. I think it's the right word.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm out on tour with Joe and we do a meet and greet Q&A for like 45 minutes to an hour every day. And I Joe and I kind of have become very good at sort of tag teaming and covering various bases because we've had such a wonderful, rich guitar career. So when I watched the Rick Beato, I realized, there's some nice little gems in there.
I love the whole idea of the music theory. To me, that is, there are things in life that what we do for a living. And the only analogy I can give is I was in the Navy for 8 years in the submarine service, way back when.
Yeah.
But I got so into it, I didn't want to leave the submarine. I loved being in a submarine. I loved everything about it. When I got put on shore duty, I hated it.
Yeah.
And it's all I wanted to do. And then when you guys start talking about music theory, and what was the name of the teacher in high school?
Bill Westcott.
Yeah, and the way, the reverence you talk about it, though, that to me was interesting. And that's something when I watch you play and I watch Joe play, I understand it's a deeper connection than maybe most of us will ever understand.
Well, it just goes back so far. I mean, imagine being 12 years old, 13, 14, 15, your mentality, and imagine being that age and falling totally in love with the guitar. And then imagine that there's a person that has all the secrets for you, and that was Joe for me. And then the lessons just transformed into these glorious just jamming sessions, like hours and hours. And when you do that, you're honing a skill that's probably the most vital skill in being a musician, and that's the ability to listen in the moment and contribute or respond. And Joe and I have touched that intimate space a lot. And I've jammed with a lot of guitar players, and very rewarding most of the time. Um, and some of them, when you get down into the trenches, so to speak, can make that connection. You like I've jammed with many guitar players where you enter that space, but with Joe, it's just different. He thinks differently, he responds differently. He's very sharing, he's very open, and he's just wildly creative. I mean, we last night we did we did a jam and it was just so ridiculous. We were just laughing at ourselves.
Well, you guys are going to be here Tuesday night. I want to mention BroadwayInDetroit.com, the Fisher Theater. What a beautiful venue. And
Yeah.
Sea of Emotion. I want to get back to when the story about you being 12 and going to his front door, because if no one's pitched you that movie idea, I'll produce the damn thing. I mean, come on. But
Right.
Sea of Emotion, the first single, part one at least, this is where you guys hung out, right? Tell the story, because I think
Yeah.
once you tell the story, Steve, people go, "Oh, damn! I started listening to that song on a whole nother level."
Yeah. It's a great story because well, we grew up in a little town on Long Island. It's not even a town, it's so small. It's called a hamlet. And in it, there was, like most towns, there was the schools. There was kindergarten, there was middle school, and then the high school. And, these kinds of schools had all sorts of lacrosse and football fields and multiple baseball fields and playgrounds. So the schools were like this. And then there was this giant real estate area that had all of these things, and that was a perfect place for crazy teenagers, especially my group of friends. Joe was a little older, like 4 years, so he hung out with a different group.
Right.
But my group of friends were such derelicts, you know. I mean, we were all just crazy. You know, we did all the crazy teenage things that you grow up and you wonder how you escaped it without being killed or something, you know, or arrested or any of this stuff. So the big field in between the schools was one of those den of iniquities, those places that we just ran from the cops, hid, partied, and would sit and just look out over this great big field and just talk, you know. And it was coined the Sea of Emotion. And I didn't really hang out there with Joe with his friends because they were a little older, but he lived right down the street. And then many times after my lessons, we would get in his little Volkswagen Bug and drive to a little parking area that overlooked this giant sea of emotion and just sit and talk and talk and talk. And it was just fantastic. You know, you discover the secrets of the universe when you're a teenager.
That's why I love listening to the song, hearing how you guys are playing back and forth off each other. And that's in my mind's eye. I see you sitting in that car, just talking about life, just two young guys talking about life, and you're going to conquer the world.
Yeah. And in part two, which you haven't heard yet. So what happened was Joe and I decided to finally tour. What's interesting, somebody sent me an article from the 90s when we were both doing an interview with Guitar World or one of those magazines. And they asked us if we were ever going to tour together. And basically the answer was, well, we play a lot together. We tour together as G3 to do an actual solo tour together. Maybe, you know, in the future sometime, because right now we're busy making records and, you know, and I even mentioned maybe we'll call it the Sea of Emotion because it was an inside thing for Joe and I.
So
And
this has
then,
been bouncing around for 30 years.
yeah, so it's been kicking
Wow.
around. So once we started the Satch-Vai tour, Joe and I thought it would be good to have some new music just to play. So before I knew it, I get an email and it's got these two beautiful tracks in it that Joe wrote. It was the Sea of Emotion Part 1 and Part 2. And Part 1 we released, and I was inspired to write a piece, which is the Sea of Emotion Part 3. And what's so interesting about this is when I used to take lessons with Joe, he had a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And after I was taking lessons for a year and a half, he broke this thing out and we recorded. He showed me this riff, a really cool riff. It goes, if I remember. Well, edit that out. I can't remember right now. But it's a pretty wicked riff. And we recorded it. And I was playing the riff, Joe was playing the chords. And then years later, he sent me the reel-to-reel tape and I transferred it to digital and I took a snippet of it and I opened the track with it. And then I took what we were playing, and I fleshed it out into an entire piece. So in Part 3, you get to actually hear Steve and Joe as teenagers playing. Wow. Yeah, it's really cute.
We did a thing here, Steve, with we have a big connection with Bob Seger, obviously here in the Motor City. And a friend of mine told me about a song called The Lonely One, which was the very first song Bob recorded. He was in high school. He did 3 acetates and he took them to Ann Arbor radio stations. So I said, well, that's the unicorn. I got to find it. Well, I couldn't find it. I get an email from a guy saying, I found it at a garage sale and I made a copy of it. Do you want to hear it? He sent it to us. We got permission and we played it on the air. Bob's very first song when he was 16, and it pops and it's got hiss, and there is no, the acetates are gone. I don't know, but we've got that digital thing of it. And we played it for Bob one time in studio, and the look on his face, he went right back there. Were you the same way?
Oh, he didn't know you were going to play it for him?
He knew we had it, but I think when he heard it, it was still all of a sudden, he's 16 working out his first song. Did you get the same rush of emotions when you listen to this?
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. You had to be the same way with Sea Emotions. Like with Part 3, all of a sudden it takes you back there, doesn't it?
Well, I didn't realize the effect it was going to have on me when I was, listening to it back. It's just so, yeah, it's charming. I mean, it's amazing, really. that
I,
we recorded it 52 years ago, and here it is, and now it's a song. It's crazy.
there were two musicians and artists that scared me in a good way, and you're one of them. The first one was Pat Benatar. I heard "Treat Me Right," and I said, "All right, she's going to kick my ass if I don't treat. I better step my game up." Pat Benatar, and meant it in the best way possible. And then the first time I saw you play guitar, and you have this little grin on your face, Steve. And I don't know where you go when you play, but it's awesome. And I'm looking, going, I don't know where he goes, but that's a cool place, and I'll never go there. But I like watching you play. Are you aware that you kind of your face sort of you get this little videotaping this your shit-eating grin, and off you go.
Yeah, well, it's when you're doing it, you don't really, well, at least myself, I don't know what it looks like, until I look at a video or something, and then I'm like, wow, look at that guy. He's so weird, but interesting. Uh, I go into the music, I just try to get out of the way, the critical little voice in the head. I just shut it up and let my natural kind of instincts move me and play the guitar. That's very freeing and rewarding. But it took it took a lot of time for me to not fight it because it's kind
Confidence
of
or
peculiar.
comfort? What do you mean fight it? It was just
Well,
trying
so,
to be somebody else on stage.
well, it's kind of like one of these things is different than the other, you
Right.
know? So you've got protocol. And in the 80s, if you were a rock guy, there was a particular protocol, or at least a psychological one, where you could act a certain way, dress a certain way, grow your hair a certain way. And I tried all that. And I fell into that relatively well, but there was just things about my personality that wanted to move differently and act differently and play differently. And it was a little outside of the norm. And when you do that, you can be harshly criticized, but that's just because you're different, And uh, I would try to police my uh, hamminess. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, but after it just got too hard because it just would keep coming out. So I just surrendered to it. And
That's amazing. It's amazing on stage. You and Joe. I mean, playing off each other, and all the reviews so far are just unbelievable. And
yeah, it's so nice.
I was on social and I was kind of surfing around, and you guys dropped into the Kinks on one of the encores, and
Yeah.
this woman lost her mind, and I think she screamed through the entire song. Um, what is the first song that Joe taught you that was like a cover that you guys played? What was the first one he taught you?
Oh, well, it must have been a Led Zeppelin song because I was always the lessons were focused more on technique and understanding theory and improvising and chords. And if he was to show me a song, it was because I would bring something in and ask him, and I did that all the time. So at first, it was probably Heartbreaker from Led Zeppelin, anything on Led Zeppelin 2. And then that I remember once I was in a band then a little later, and we were doing a bunch of Bad Company covers. And I couldn't really figure out. And Joe had just great ears, even as a young teenager. And so he would show me a lot of that stuff. He taught me how to figure stuff out.
He also kind of called you out on a lesson. I love that conversation about what was the you had to remember all the notes on the neck, right?
Yeah,
On the guitar, and then you were like, nah, I don't do that. You came back the next week and he kicked your ass out.
right away. And he took my $5. And it was the
What did
best
that
lesson. It was the best lesson I ever had.
what did it do to you? I mean, because you've talked about this before. What did that moment do to you to make you who you are now?
Well, as you're growing up, you're inundated with conditioned thinking, from your teachers, from the news, from parents, the whole society, and, we're all led to kind of create identities for ourselves based on the way people treat you. So I was never really an exceptional student. I was very average, below average in many things, you know, English, social studies, history. I never studied one bit of history. It was the most boring, uninteresting account of horror, you know, and English just didn't make sense to me because I wrote phonetically. So you can be led to believe that there's something wrong with you know. And with other things going on, I developed sort of a low self-esteem, and I didn't believe much in myself in certain areas. And when I went to that first lesson, and Joe said, memorize all the notes, you know, the first thing I thought is, well, I can't, I'm too stupid, or I don't have that brain muscle, you know, because I can't remember social studies or many of these other kinds of topics. So I kind of blew it off and thought I can get away with it. But when I went back to that lesson and he said, you know, play an F sharp on the B string. And I was just like, and he said, okay, stop, go home, and don't come back until you know the lesson. And as I was walking out of his house, his mom was at the door. And Joe said two things that had a profound impact on me. And you have to realize back then that, you know, Joe was like an older kid and he could play, and we all worshiped him. You know, we all took lessons from him, and he was in a rock band and he had long hair and he was just cool. And Joe, he was always solid and straight, just really straight, you know. And I'm leaving the house and his mom says, how'd the lesson go? And Joe says, my star student is losing his brain. And that, you know, he said two things: my star student, which meant a lot, you
Right.
know, because there was a lot of kids in the neighborhood taking lessons, is losing his brain meant a lot, because it meant to me that he had hope and faith in me, and I was letting that down. But most of all, I was letting myself down. So that walk home to my house it was pivotal in my entire life trajectory, because as I was walking home, I reprogrammed my subconscious, and basically I embraced the thought, you will never go to your lesson again without knowing it fully. You are going to learn every single thing about music that there is, because you're not stupid. You know, you're not, you know, you got this. And that was it. That was it. I learned everything, you know, even outside of my lessons with Joe. You know, I started composing, I started uh, playing and jamming a lot more, and I memorized all the notes.
Well, that is that where, because I remember in the 90s, you were legendary for what was it, the 10-hour practice, the rehearsal, the warm-up stuff that everybody was trying to do like Steve Vai. What did you think when it became a thing? When everyone, like all these guitar players are like, I gotta do what he's doing. Is that a result of that one lesson way back when with Joe?
Well, that Joe's message to me, I internalized it and I reprogrammed myself. And everything from that point there was more quality in what I did. There was more quality in my practices, my studies. There was more focus. There was a more intensity. And my path in those days was that 10-hour lesson, and which then turned into the 30-hour lesson, which covered my practice regime for 3 days, you know. And my path was very technical in the beginning. I worked a lot of finger exercises, scales up and down, you know, developing my technique. That may not be necessary, but it was something I wanted to do. I really wanted to develop a transparent playing style that could do anything, you know. At least that, that was in the brain of a teenager. And I used to practice a lot, and I kept rigid notes. And when I wrote that article, that was my normal, what I'd hoped to achieve every day.
Right.
Yeah, so you can kind of get an idea of what I was doing as a teenager.
So I see you got the guitar now, and you kind of before a show. I'd imagine you and Joe, you don't go that far down the road. But what do you do to warm up for a concert? Do you just a couple notes? Do you like get your fingers loose? What is the process? I have no idea. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm in radio. We just drink coffee and talk. So yeah,
Well, I like to warm up for about an hour, and
yeah.
I have little, loops and playbacks and a little rig that I have backstage. And I just this is conventionally warm up. And then there's a couple of parts in the show where the riffs are kind of tricky, so I brush up on them. Like Building the Church is a song of mine. I do all this tapping, and I got to practice that every day. But these days I'm practicing about 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours before each show, because I'm learning beat music, King Crimson music.
Oh, that's right. Oh yeah, you and Adrian are going. That's going to be. I
Yeah,
don't think people understand how big that tour is going to be. That's huge.
yeah, it's virtually sold out. The guitar parts are treacherous, they're relentless, and there's a lot of it. I mean, two
It's
hours
amazing.
of that those 80s King Crimson records and Robert Fripp's parts.
Oh my
Boy, oh
gosh.
boy, it's kicking my ass, but it feels great, and I'm gonna be so I'm so jazzed about this.
I,
It's one of the most exciting things I've ever been a part of.
I've always said, Steve, that I consider electric guitar players that if Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, whoever you want to talk about, were in this time, they would pick up the electric guitar because of the way you guys can express yourself in your own way. And I've seen the route that you've taken over the years, and Joe takes, in so many amazing guitar players. I mean, I can go on and on and on about the Hendrix, obviously, and all that, but there's young players too. Have you ever sat down and watched the movie Amadeus?
Uh, 3 or 4 times easily.
Really? Okay, because
Yeah,
I'm a race car fan. We all watch Senna because of Ayrton Senna, the Formula One driver, and I'm like, you have to watch Amadeus because that's you, the whole creative process and how he went there.
well, I think us humans are endowed with creativity for sure. Absolutely, every one of us. Uh, and when we find that thing that's interesting, like our note, when we find whether it's race car driving or cooking or bricklaying, whatever it is, music, when you find it and it's your groove, so to speak. It's the thing that feels good to you. It's the thing that you know you want to engage in and that you're effective at. It makes sense to you. Music always made total sense to me. English and history never did. And this didn't make sense. I mean, of course, it made sense, but it was useless. And but music just was like poof, there it was. And I think that kind of instant understanding. Of course, I had to study, but it came really easy. Uh, I think that people who have a propensity for music, that's part of their DNA. And I think that's the same with Mozart, Beethoven, all the greats. Any great musician uh, has had a propensity for music, and you can tell because they never decided to be a musician. They just
That's
were. It's like people ask me, when did you decide? Like, I never decided because it
the
was never an
muse.
option.
Yeah, the muse chose you. The muse.
Yes. And
Yeah.
you need to find your muse, because then life is good. Everything you do is enjoyable, and it expands. Um, and the challenges they look more like opportunities, you know.
You got you guys are going to be fantastic. Tuesday again. I'd be remiss if I don't mention this. Tuesday night here in Detroit at the Fisher Theater, BroadwayInDetroit.com. Joe Satriani, Steve-Vai on stage, and you guys are going to do your own stuff and get together. It's kind of
Yeah,
jamming
it's
towards
more
the
like
end of it as well.
this particular tour is more like a G2 format.
I was going to
I
say, yeah.
I play for an hour, and then Joe plays for an hour with his band, and then we come out together and we kick off with the Sea of Emotion, and then we do a couple of real fun jams.
As a guy, I've been doing this for a while, not, and it's one of the things that I almost get where I don't want to ask about Jimi Hendrix because I feel like it's asking about a McDonald's cheeseburger kind of thing. But you know what I mean? Like I'm talking to, you're one of my favorite guitar players in the world, and I speak for a lot of people. But if I bring up Hendrix, I might just go into the softball question. I don't understand how Hendrix did what he did when I'd watch him. Am I the only one? Like there were things that I'd watch and go, like he did Sergeant Pepper's 2 days after they released the album and played it for him in concert. Are you the same way, or are we just as like regular folks sitting out in the crowd watching this stuff?
Well, Jimmy found what was natural to him. So it was easy for him. Like I can listen to Sergeant Pepper's and you give me you give me 15 minutes and I'll have an arrangement, but it's not going to sound like what Jimmy did because I'm not him, So musicians that have a good ear can do that kind of thing relatively easily, but they're going to sound like them. When Jimmy did that Sergeant Pepper's, I mean, he played it like Jimi Hendrix, surprisingly. And it was just so great, but I'm sure that he knew it 10 minutes after he heard it.
That's crazy. That's crazy to me. And the last thing, Crossroads is an underrated movie, and I'm a big believer in certain. I will bring up underrated films. It's a great movie, but you did both parts, right? I mean, you did Ralph's playing as well.
Yes, I did everything except the slide. All the slide guitar in the duel scene was Ry Cooder.
How do you play two different styles? You're playing against yourself. That had to be kind of confusing.
No,
you're trying to create someone to go against you and play in his style.
Well, it was all it was kind of in the script.
Okay.
The script was written as a sort of like a Karate Kids duel.
It kind of was,
Karate
yeah.
Kid duel, and with guitars. So I read the script and it was all laid out. Jack Butler plays plays something that sounds like a freight train. So I read that and I said, I know what to do. I'm going to tune down to D, and I'm just going to go gong 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 woo woo. That's a freight train. And then Ry brilliantly came up with the response because it had to go like, it was a duel. So each person had to kind of outdo each other. And Ry's choo-choo train was just fantastic. So then Jack Butler gets mad and he blasts into a riff, and it's in the script. So I said, okay, what would I do if I was just showed up being a freight train, So it grew. It went back and forth and back and forth. And once it got to the really crazy stuff, the slide really couldn't compete with, flailing fingers. But in the script, what Eugene, who was the Ralph Macchio, his secret weapon was that he was trained as a classical guitar player. And he was
remember, you're right. Okay.
Rock
Yeah.
blues against Jack Butler, against me. So his trick bag was, and this was in the script, it said he played a piece of music that was a mix between blues and classical. So that was my cue to conceive of the that part. And that was basically, I said, okay, classical. I know what classical sounds like. I know what, so let me make it very obvious by starting with 2 bars of a Paganini caprice. So
Okay.
that was Paganini, but then I just took it from there, and I had to merge blues into it. So I just built it, Now I knew I had to build it in a way that Eugene would sound, so that was on a clean guitar, and it had to be very accurate and I tripled that guitar part. The one that Eugene plays, there's actually 3 of me playing it.
Wow.
And then Jack Butler had to respond. And at first, this is a funny story, when Jack Butler responded me, I had to play the same thing that I recorded for him, but more like in a Jack Butler style, but I had to mess it up. And the first time I messed it up, I didn't mess it up bad enough. It wasn't obvious to the audience that I really blew it. So a month after we finished filming, they called everybody back for one day to shoot one scene, and I had to lose worse. So I went into the studio and I re-recorded the riff that I lost on, and I made it very obvious I'm losing, you know, and falling to my knees. I mean, the last note I hit has like 20 guitars all playing, tritones and semitones, it's like I lost, So
I love that. So
yeah, and
falling
they
to your,
rebuilt
falling to
the
your
whole
knees,
yeah, they
falling to
rebuilt
your
the
knees
whole
and everything.
church.
You're like, look, I'm gonna make damn sure you guys know I lost. I'm gonna do
Yeah.
everything I possibly can. Although again, Jack Butler won that. Come on, let's be honest. Let's be honest. That's the second Ralph Macchio movie. He had an illegal kick to the face in Karate Kid, and then this whole thing where, yeah, he's 2 for 2. Macchio, come on, man. What are you doing? What are you doing,
They
man?
can't win for losing.
You sound
Hollywood, it's
good.
all a scam.
Yeah, you sound good. I know you got so much going on, and we can't wait for Tuesday night here in Detroit.
Yeah,
Steve,
me
you and
too.
Joe, it's about time, man. I assume everyone I know, I don't know that I've ever talked to an artist in 23 years here in Detroit that's ever said, yeah, I don't like playing in Detroit. We get you, the
Oh
Midwest
no,
sensibilities, you know?
it is a rockin' city, man. And I'm looking so forward to the show.
All
Thank you
right.
so much, Jim.
Oh, it's an honor. It's an absolute honor. All the best. Congratulations with everything, and
All
we'll
right.
see you soon.
You
Thanks,
got
Steve.
it. Thanks, brother. Bye bye.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you, sir.